You're sitting at the edge of a quiet room, watching everyone talk around the table as if your presence barely shifts the air. Someone laughs, someone sighs, and you stay still, careful not to need too much. You learned early how to take up less space, how to swallow words before they become inconvenient. If this moment feels uncomfortably familiar, it may not belong only to the past. Sometimes it follows you forward, shaping how you listen, love, and stay quiet. You're welcome to stay here for a while, in a place where that silence is finally noticed. As time went on, the feeling didn't stay in one moment. It spread quietly into the spaces between moments. There was a constant sense of trying to understand what had gone wrong without ever being told. A child in this position often feels confused long before feeling angry, confused about why warmth appears for others and not for them, confused about how silence can feel heavier than words. Over time, that confusion turns inward. When there is no clear explanation, the mind fills in the gaps on its own. It learns to assume responsibility for the distance it feels. It becomes easier to believe that the problem lives inside, rather than face the fear that love itself might be unpredictable or conditional. Silence becomes safer than asking questions. Emotional invisibility becomes familiar enough to feel normal. For a child, connection is not optional. Belonging is as necessary as food or rest. When closeness feels threatened, the mind looks for ways to preserve it at any cost. It cannot afford to see caregivers as rejecting or unsafe, because those figures represent reality itself. So instead of questioning the bond, the child adjusts their understanding of themselves. If love feels withheld, the explanation quietly becomes, "It must be me." This isn't a conscious conclusion. It happens beneath language, beneath logic. Turning rejection inward protects the attachment, even though it hurts. In that way, the child stays connected by carrying the weight alone. Adapting becomes an act of survival, not a decision. As these moments repeat, they begin to settle into something more permanent. Experiences turn into beliefs without ever being announced as such. A look that lingers too long, a tone that sharpens without warning, affection that feels earned rather than given. All of it leaves an imprint, slowly. An identity forms around these impressions. The belief that something is wrong doesn't arrive as a sentence, it arrives as a feeling that says love must be worked for, a feeling that being oneself is risky, a feeling that approval comes with conditions. This shaping happens quietly, over years, while the child is busy growing, learning, and adapting. There is no moment where it feels like a choice. It simply becomes the ground beneath their sense of self. Adulthood doesn't erase these early adaptations. It gives them new places to live. The child who learned to earn warmth may become an adult who works tirelessly, noticing every detail, striving to be flawless so rejection never has a reason to appear. The one who learned to stay quiet may become someone who listens deeply, but struggles to speak their needs aloud. Others may move in the opposite direction, creating distance before it can be created for them, relying only on themselves because dependence once felt unsafe. These patterns often show up in ordinary places, at work, in friendships, in relationships, woven into daily life so seamlessly they feel like personality traits. Yet they are responses shaped by experience, not evidence of deficiency. The body carries these memories even when the mind doesn't revisit them. Early rejection teaches the nervous system to stay alert, to scan for subtle shifts in mood or tone. Calm can feel unfamiliar. Rest can feel undeserved. When tension rises, the body reacts quickly, sometimes before there is time to think. A raised voice, a delayed reply, a distant look can trigger a rush of emotion that feels larger than the present moment. This isn't overreaction, it's recognition. The body remembers what once mattered for survival. It responds to perceived threat the way it learned to long ago, trying to keep connection intact by preparing for loss before it arrives. Over time, these reactions can shape what feels familiar in relationships. Emotional intensity may feel like closeness. Distance may feel like safety. People can find themselves drawn to dynamics that echo earlier experiences, not because they want pain, but because familiarity feels understandable. The nervous system recognizes certain rhythms and mistakes them for connection. This repetition isn't a failure to learn. It's an unfinished lesson still looking for resolution. Without awareness, the pattern continues quietly, reenacting the same emotional choreography with different faces and names. Within these adaptations, there are strengths that often go unnoticed. Sensitivity becomes a refined awareness of emotional undercurrents. Vigilance turns into an ability to read rooms, sense shifts, and respond with care. Empathy deepens because understanding others once helped maintain safety. These qualities are not signs of being broken. They are signs of a system that learned quickly and adapted deeply. Still, acknowledging strength doesn't erase the cost. Being attuned can be exhausting. Carrying responsibility for harmony can leave little room for rest. These traits deserve recognition without turning pain into something noble or necessary. Awareness begins not with fixing, but with seeing, with allowing the pattern to be named gently without judgment. When the story is understood, it loses some of its power to define the present. The experiences that shape these responses can be held with compassion rather than confusion. Nothing needs to be forced or resolved all at once. Simply noticing how the past still speaks through the present can create space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to listen to parts of the self that learn to stay quiet in order to belong. And in that space, something begins to soften, not because it has to, but because it finally feels seen. There is a quiet truth that sits beneath everything we've explored. The pain was never loud, and neither was the way it shaped you. It moved slowly, through moments that didn't seem important at the time, until they began to feel like part of who you were. Not dramatic enough to name, not obvious enough to question, just there. But what happened to you is not the same as who you are. The ways you learned to stay small, alert, or self-reliant were responses to an environment, not a reflection of your worth. Those patterns were learned in a time when you needed them, when understanding the world meant adapting to it. They were not choices made freely, and they are not definitions you must carry forever. Nothing about this story asks you to deny the hurt or rush past it. The absence, the confusion, the quiet ache, those experiences mattered. And at the same time, understanding where they came from begins to loosen their grip. Awareness doesn't erase the past, but it does open space in the present. Space where reactions can soften. Space where something new becomes possible, gently, without force. So if you return now to that familiar image, the quiet room, the table where your presence once felt uncertain, you may notice something different. You are no longer invisible to yourself. The child who adapted so carefully is still there, but they are no longer alone. And sometimes, that is where change quietly begins.